Hi, I'm Dave March, and this is kind of a special feature I'm going to do for the Land of Confusion show, kind of behind the scenes. I'm thinking of doing an essay and dropping it on the main feed at Ricochet, and I've decided against it just because, whatever. I'm also going to be dropping this on my locals, the Viva Frey Robert Barnes locals board as well, just because I want to share it to people who actually might care. It's not so. Who am I? Some of you know me from Ricochet, but I'm Tory War writer there, and on the locals board I'm at Karentov. I am Dave March. I am a riding president, a former provincial riding president. I've worked in Canada. I've worked polls. I've been to political conventions. I'm a member of both the Progressive Conservative and the Federal Conservative parties. I've worked leaderships. I've been a poll captain. I've done a lot of different things like that. So and I'm a political junkie, and when I watched I guess the big show right now was the November 3rd election, and I had a Carol O'Connor video. I was all set up, and I went to bed at 2 a.m, and I was like, oh, well, I guess Trump's pulled it off somehow. And I woke up in the morning, and suddenly Biden was in the lead everywhere, and I'm like, that doesn't sound right to me. I mean, I'm happy, more than happy to admit my defeats when they happen, but that doesn't happen. You can't come back in the back 25% of a vote when you're 16 points down. That's statistically impossible. Like, I don't know. Has anyone ever seen that anywhere before in a legitimate election? And then people are sort of like, well, this is obviously a legitimate election. And then you find out they banned the poll watchers. In Canada, we call them scrutineers. I've been a scrutineer. I remember one election where I was scrutineering, and I had to take the oath 10 times because the poll workers thought it was funny that I kept having to repeat it over and over for them. And in Canada, when you sign up to be a scrutineer at the poll station, usually you just take the oath once. And sometimes they don't make you take the oath. So when I heard some of the stuff, started watching these hearings in the States, I was like blown away about what was happening with these people giving their testimony about what happened. There are literally thousands of people giving these testimonies. You can't tell me that all those people are lying. That's another one of those impossibilities. But going, so anyways, scrutineering is important because everywhere you do something, you have to have the scrutineers available. You know, look, in Canada, it's a voluntary thing. I have a hard time getting scrutineers for all my polls. I should say impossible. I mean, my riding association's like 10, 15 people on the board, plus a few 50 volunteers maybe, where you might get for election day. So definitely we're not going to have scrutineers at all the polls, but other people will have them. The Liberals have some, the NDP have some, other parties will have some. There's important reasons to have scrutineers otherwise, but the main reason is you have to have integrity of the vote. You have to have someone watching things so no shenanigans can happen. And my condo board has scrutineers watching the ballots when we do the election. My little rinky-dink board of 15 people has scrutineers watching the ballots to make sure that everything is honest. Corporations with stockholders have their general meetings, and they have scrutineers from interested parties to make sure there's no shenanigans. And in Pennsylvania and Michigan, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, and in Georgia, and in other places, they ban the scrutineers from watching the process. That's why I believe the election is fixed. I don't even have to, I shouldn't say I believe the election is fixed. It seems obvious. Well, if you are banning, why? Why are you banning the scrutineers from watching the process? Because you're doing something illegal or wrong. That's it. That's it. People say, well, you have to present evidence. I did. They banned the scrutineers. That's all the evidence. In my country, you ban the scrutineers from the watch, like, it would be thrown out. I have been through a election, a nomination contest where I was a poll worker, where they threw out the results of the election. These things happen. The fact that they banned the poll watchers or the scrutineers from watching is evidence enough for any other country on the planet but the United States. That's not how this works. And I really get frustrated. Oh, you have to provide me evidence. I did. I gave you the evidence. I don't have to give you even the sworn affidavits of all these people. Did you or did you not ban poll watchers, scrutineers from watching your election? If there were no scrutineers at the condo board meeting, we'd turn over the condo board. If we had no scrutineers at any corporation, the stockholders would have the right to sue and get those corporate boards overturned. So these people who are saying that, I'm like, I'm sorry, that's all. There's been more shenanigans come out of these hearings, and we'll get to the hearings, but I just wanted to put that straight out there. I mean, the day after, I've been on a diet and exercise, and I do a walk every day. And I ran into a friend of mine from the party on November 4th, and he said, David, what would have happened if you and I were in a poll room and they told us to shut down, go home, come back tomorrow? And I'm like, I think I would. And what would you have done? I'm like, I think I would have punched the Elections Canada worker in the face for saying that. More than likely, at the minimum, like we saw in that Georgia thing where the guys left. I'm sorry, guys. This is a problem I find with Americans. You are staggering naive on a lot of things, especially conservatives. It's something I've seen numerous times coming down in your country. You just do not, you seem to be shocked when someone does something nefarious and underhanded. It's kind of nice, I guess, but this is, look, at the minimum, I would have stayed at poll station and slept there on the floor if I had to. I would have called a few of my people up higher up in the party and would be screaming and complaining about them at first. And I'm sure they would be like, what the hell are you talking about, Dave? You can't, that's not what's happening. And I would said, at the minimum, I would have asked someone to go over to my place or go get me a sleeping bag or something, or get me some relief to come down here to the polling station where I'm going to be sleeping tonight until I'm relieved in the morning. That's how we roll. I have friends to validate the vote in Canada for the conservative leaderships, where to prevent leaking of information, after they did their scrutiny hearing of the ballot boxes for the conservative leadership, they had to check in their phones because they didn't want to release early because it would screw up the event, any excitement coming from it, and slept on cots with the ballot boxes. This is what it's like in every other country, but in America. This idea that only you're doing signature background checks. In order to get my vote in that mail-in ballot, I had to send a copy of my driver's license, complete with my face on it, or my citizenship ID. What is going on in the United States of America? Anyways, I wanted to talk a bit more than just rant on that. I wanted to talk about some of the things I saw. Yeah, so the hearings themselves, these hearings are kind of interesting. The mainstream media, not even the conservative news networks have been covering it. And we have seen some grassroots organization. I never heard of Right Side Broadcasting Network before November 4th. But suddenly there was one of the few groups that's going to cover the hearings. And they are like, I think the Rebel in Canada was the first one who did it. We used to have in Canada a network kind of like the Fox News of Canada, but it was more called Sun News, but it was more like Lou Dobbs Tonight used to be back in the early 2000s. That's kind of what the Rebel was like. And so when Sun News shut down, they started up a grassroots funded organization to fund all their news network on YouTube and doing all this stuff. And they were, unlike the Daily Wire or something like that, they were trying to actually do news journalism. And then they fell down the rabbit hole into activism. So I'm not exactly the biggest fan of the Rebel, even though sometimes they're the only place where I can get accurate news on what's going on in my country. Anyways, so Right Side Broadcasting Network has started up, I guess, in the last year, and they're completely crowdsourced. They do not need, they rely on a couple of corporate sponsors. The My Pillow guy seems to be funding their entire network, but it was something else that I saw on the last Ricochet main flagship broadcast, where people are like, well, Trump's looking to start his own media empire after he's president. And one of the guys, a guy named Rob Long, who's worked at Fox News, and he's one of the founders of Ricochet. And he said something weird. He's like, well, good luck with that. It took Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes billions of dollars for a year for 10 years to get a network up and running on cable news, and then it started making money. And I'm like, you don't need to have a giant office anymore. You don't need all this stuff. Everything is small, diffuse, leaner organizations that can just run on, like, look at me, I'm some guy spouting off into the internet on a $40 microphone and Zoom and a $30 camera. I should probably get a new one. I've been noticing something. Yeah, there's a little delay, but maybe that'll be my Christmas present for myself. Anyways, so we can see that we don't need to go and do all these crazy things like having big studios. We can be running down. Tim Pool's a great example. He just went down to Wall Street. He was a kid living on the streets. He goes down to Wall Street during the Occupy Wall Street rallies and starts filming on his camera form and interviewing people and trying to find what's going on. And he built him up into a small little mini empire. And that's the thing. So we now have the ability to go out and do things where we're disconnected from the network news. The Pennsylvania, I remember distinctly watching Right Side Broadcast News Network, rewatching the Pennsylvania hearings, and they had 3.5 million views. And big corporate events, like they did a Star Trek fan event about a month ago, and they were getting like 200 views on a Patrick Stewart video. It was pathetic. So I'm just giving you some ideas. We're no longer, it's much more guerrilla journalism now, and you can get a crowdsourced network pretty good and going, and you don't need all this infrastructure and all this talent with billions of dollars to spend to lose every year. You can just run it off of small crowdsourced funding, right? So I don't know if I'm going to guess that despite the fact they got 3.5 million views, which I understand is like $1,000 for a million views, for 10,000 views or something like that. Anyways, they're probably demonetized. And they didn't get it, but they're running off of crowdsourcing and occasionally big donations from people. So you can get things going now these days with not much of money. Like Glenn Greenwald resigned from The Intercept, and he's now running on Substack from donations like people from me, and he's apparently already making somewhat close to his old Intercept money. So you don't need all this stuff anymore. And I think that's going to be really the driving force behind so much of what's going on, that one of the big problems we're seeing with the institutions is that there's guerrilla forces within on the internet who are able to do things that they have no idea what's going on. And a good example of this is on the Locals board, where Robert Barnes and Viva Frey are. Robert Barnes, who doesn't know, is a very major civil rights attorney in the United States of America. And he's also a constitutional lawyer. So he's doing elections. he was one of the guys who went on the Trump team and then left, and then is probably back now after they finally got rid of Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood, who are shysters. Well, Sidney Powell is probably a true believer who just swallowed nonsense, and Lynn Wood, I'm convinced, is a Democrat plant designed to sow chaos in the conservative movement. So though he went on the board and he's telling us what's going on and how to fight this, and what we need to do is bring what's going on with the law cases and why people are screwing up. And he created this list of what an election contest, because in America, anyone can, in many of these states, anyone can contest the elections after they've been certified. So he created this form for people to fill out, and I'm going to guess dozens, maybe 100. I don't know. I don't know the numbers on the site, though I have a feeling it's pretty, maybe 1,000 members on there. Let's say 100 people send out election contest notifications in all the states based on this one guy creating a board 2 weeks before the election. That's like, this is the guerrilla world we now live in, where we don't have to rely on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News to tell us what's going on. We're out there grassroots organizing against what's going on with technology, with new technology and new websites and new ideas that are putting the more traditional old school line conservatives, and I'm going to say progressive Democrats, to shame, where, you know, everyone is now, what is it? I don't know who said it. My father did once say it to me, something similar. You know why all those judges in the United States are going crazy? And I'm like, well, I was much younger at this time. And they're like, no, not really. It's like Robert Bork. And he pointed out, every time progressives will push the envelope, and then conservatives and liberals press the envelope, then conservatives come by and refine it and make it work for them. And that's what we're seeing now with a lot of these outreach organizations. So yeah, I'm rambling a little bit. I'm going to get up to the next thing here. The hearings themselves, I wanted to speak about that. So these hearings are, first off, you get, I remember in the 2000 election, and there's these guys, all these lawyers were down in this little judge's place who's never thought this is happening. He's got cameras all around him. He's got armies of lawyers coming back arguing over like the hanging chads in front of him, and he's just so bemused by this situation. These guys, especially not just Republicans, some of the Democrats are very serious, and they're taking this stuff very seriously. And they're getting complaints from their constituents. So the public pressure that other people like Robert Burns and Richard Bears have been saying we need to bring is working. Like these guys are getting, and the Georgia hearing, one of the Democrats was like, I know the insane pressure I'm getting. I understand you're all getting insane pressure to do something, but you shouldn't just ignore what you just saw on the camera, because that's crazy. But these guys are taking it very seriously because they're like us. They're not tied into official Washington. They are still like, they still have that collegiate, and certainly Michigan, you got to see it, where the Democratic vice chair is ribbing his conservative, the Republican, and making jokes with them and talking and being like what it was before 2000 election. And you're just getting this kind of like, you get to see your legislative process in action. I didn't know in Georgia that all the senators have these like neat little pins that have to identify themselves to each other and what's going on. And kind of like the dress code that they seem to be all sharing. And they're all like, yeah, we're getting like yelled at by our constituents in a way we've never had before. And I don't have questions for, they're asking me all these questions and I want the answers, and they're getting some of the answers. But like one guy in Georgia, he said he and another state senator went to Okay, so first the witness comes forward and he says, yeah, I went down to this where the ballots were all secured, and at any time I could, there was loading dock doors in the air, there's practically no security, it's a giant warehouse, there was a box of ballots right beside me, I could have picked it up and walked out the door. And the state senators, one of the state senators, like, yeah, me and another friend of mine, one of the other senators, went down to this building. That was it, this building? And he's like, I believe so. We went down there and we saw the same thing. So the craziness of this election and the stuff is making these guys are the real deal. They really want to help their constituents, and they're not beholden necessarily to the big wigs in Washington and all the corporate machines that are up there. They're not beholden to the lobbyists. They probably don't have to fundraise like crazy just to keep in. They can actually do their jobs. And the other thing you notice when you're watching these hearings, some of the Democrats are real scum, and especially in the machine ones. And you can tell the Republicans and some of the Democrats are eye rolling every time, especially the Detroit machinery guys were speaking. And like, there was like gavel banging and all these other stuff. And you can tell these guys don't like these guys. One of the things that happened near the tail end of one of the Michigan Senate hearing, they brought in someone, I can't remember what her title is, but it sounded like they all knew, both the chair and the vice chair knew who she was, and they've been like friends forever. And she's retired. I'm going to guess she would have been like in Canada, she'd be a deputy minister for the Secretary of State. And she was this very large Black woman, very in her mid 60s, perhaps late 50s, I'm not too sure. And the Democrat says, why can't we do a recount? I was trying to get that out of someone earlier. And you didn't, at this point, when I remembered him at the beginning of the hearing, he was really nailing an ex-senator for this. And the guy didn't have the answer because he was concerned with the Dominion voting process. But this Democrat senator knew the answer and why he was bringing it up. And he got it from this woman. And he said, why can't we do a recount in Detroit? And she's like, well, Senator, because we can't look at 72% of the ballots. So if you're the Trump campaign, why are you going to spend money on a recount when you can't see 2/3 of the ballots? And then you realize that that's what the guy wanted everyone to hear. He didn't want to just profit out himself. He wanted a witness to tell the committee why that. And then he's like, well, why aren't we, me and my fellows want to have an honest, and we want to win these elections fair and square. What's going on in Detroit? And this woman said, we are, well, I can tell you, for the last, I was involved in the Secretary of State's office for Michigan for 29 years, so 30 years. And we have never had an honest election in Detroit in the last 30 years. Like, mic drop moment. And the Democrats, well, why hasn't the Republicans fixed this? Well, why haven't they passed laws? I was like, we have passed laws. All these things that we're talking about, these ballot stuffing and harvesting issues, are illegal. But if you can't get the police forces to enforce the laws and go in there, and if you know, and she's like, and you know the reason why we can't enforce these laws is because if we try, we're all going to have them be excoriated in the media for going after Black people. Like, you're all going to be called racist. I'm going to be called racist. And she's a Black woman. We're all going to get called all sorts of nasty names and be smeared in the media. And we'll have all these terrible things happen to us if we don't do because of this. And then, like, the vice chair says to the chair, yeah, I know we haven't been able to have an honest count out of Detroit in decades. Like, we want to fix it just as much as you do. And I think that's the key to this issue of this, what we're watching in the hearings, is that these guys are, the Georgia guys, well, the Michigan guys know they have a problem, this machine in Detroit. The Georgian guys they don't know if their election was stolen, but they're really worried that they have a large amount of their base believes it. And they're like, we need to prove to our people we did everything possible, because they're telling us they don't believe in democracy. It's like that little old episode of Simpson. Little girl doesn't believe in democracy, and there's a panic, and the president comments, and the rest of the congressmen, and it all goes away. And in some ways, that's what's going on here. The state senate in Georgia is like, we're going to call the governor, and we're going to get a special session, and we're going to deal with this, because I don't know if they're going to overturn the election or not, but they're going to force that forensic audit through, and it'll be an honest forensic audit. And the Detroit in Michigan, they just don't know. Like they're like, how do we do a forensic audit on Detroit? Like, and the woman's like, I think we're going to have to bring in the federal government to force them to do this. We don't need to have the FBI and our Secretary of State's office clean Detroit out. Yeah. So, and then there's the Pennsylvania hearing, which I watched, and the Arizona hearing I watched a little bit of. The most striking thing on the Arizona hearing was just all these everyone there just going like, what do you mean we don't do these things? So I guess there is like a lot of illegal immigrants in there, but there's programs that allow them to register for driver's license, and that program is monitored by the federal government. So I guess there's like 300,000 names on that list. Why aren't they checking against, before they mail out a ballot to someone, if they're on that list or not? And they don't check. And there are other things like that came up in those hearings. So I understand there's other stuff that's going on with the election stuff with judges. I'm not going to cover that because I don't really know much about that. I'm more interested in what happened in the hearings. I will say, watching the Pennsylvania hearing, if any one hearing is basically rigged or not a fake hearing, I guess it's the Pennsylvania hearing. I don't think Giuliani and his guys are rigging that. I think there's no Democrat there. I'll be perfectly admit. That was a campaign rally, and Doug Mastriano is going to run for governor. And that was his announcement. That 6-minute speech at the end is great. I've watched it like 20 times. I agree. And Giuliani was presenting great stuff to these guys, but they had already made up their mind. They are livid about the stuff that the Democrat governor, the Secretary of State, and their own Supreme Court have been doing to them for years. And they see a chance to rid themselves of a lot of crap, and they're going to do this. So they already, and Pennsylvania is another one where they banned poll watchers. They did have poll watchers in Georgia, but a lot of them were not allowed to get anywhere near. They were allowed to observe the process from a safe distance for COVID protections. And then there were people who were specifically, so the video, I'll talk a little bit about that video that Giuliani's lawyers presented, and that's a big reason why you're getting the recount. I got told by Eric Erickson, and he said, oh, this is what happened, and don't worry about it. And I thought, oh, okay, that's okay. And then I went like, wait a minute. Okay, so the election, they said, well, they came in here, and there were some ballots of boxes that were finished. So they sent the bulk of the staff home, and they finished these 3 open boxes of ballots. And there was an official person from the elections Georgia watching the ballot workers watch. So there was no activity of problems. And I'm like, yeah, but if I try to do that at my condo board, it would be thrown out, because you watched without scrutiny or supervision. That's how this works. You can't count. I don't care that Elections Canada was there watching the poll workers. I don't care, or that. That's not how this works. You have to have the scrutineers watch. Just because some government flunky is there, well, I don't know who that is. I don't know his partisan leaning, Democrat or Republican. That's why we have scrutineers who are partisan and watching, so we can contain election integrity. So I don't care that there was some official government flunky there. That's not how it works. Okay, so getting back to some of the other stuff that's going on. So what do I think about Julie? Oh yeah, so yeah, like I said, if any one of the hearings there is that Giuliani went in there, they asked him lots of honest questions. I don't think he was doing anything wrong in his presentation. I do appreciate Doug Mastriano and the Senate Republicans there. Maybe the Democrats boycotted it. Maybe there was a Democrat there, but was on side. But that was a campaign rally. I've been to campaign rallies. I know campaign rally when I'm watching one. So back to and that's another thing. When I'm saying that these guys are these state houses are really looking forward to sticking it to them, I'm reminded of a story I once heard from Newt Gingrich, and he was talking about how when he first got elected to the House Minority Leadership position in the late 80s under George H.W. Bush, because there was some shuffling going around. And he's like, oh, I thought this guy was going to get it. Well, they're just appointed him Secretary of Defense. So he's probably not going to take, was it Dick Cheney? No, it was Donald. Yeah, it was Dick Cheney, I think it was. So Dick Cheney's being appointed, it was in Congress. And he was going to be everyone just assumed he was going to be the minority leader. And he said something like, and someone came up to Newt and he said, yeah, so who's going to be the next minority leader? He's like, it's going to obviously be Cheney. And he's like, well, Cheney just got appointed to the Secretary of Defense, so the position's open. So Newt Gingrich goes out, and he's like a lone radical Republican at this time. And he's just getting up his caucus to the regular supporters, the outliers like him, the outsiders like him, to come in and help take over the show. And he just wants to make an honest race out of it. And at one point, he later learned why he won is that earlier in the day, in one of because the Democrats been running that house by that time, 38 years or something like that. And they would run it for 40 years. So they got pretty arrogant and corrupt and all sorts of weird things going on in it. So in one point, one of the Democrat chairmans had treated his vice chair like crap, just like schooled him and embarrassed him in front of all the people and in the room, and made him feel like a fool. And the guy gets up and walks out the door, and he turns to his friend, I'm voting for Gingrich. And he's like, but aren't you pledged to the Merrill? And he's like, hell, someone's got to stand up to these people, and Newt's going to do it. And that's what I'm thinking we're seeing a bit with certainly in some of these hearings, is that they're choosing this as an opportunity. They may or may not care if Trump wins, and they may not have any loyalty to him, but they want to stick it to their state Democrats who've been treating them, especially in Pennsylvania, like dirt. So that's why some of this is actually working. Now I'm going to get into Giuliani. Yeah, so Giuliani has been great in these hearings, and one of the reasons why people forget, and he hasn't practiced law in 30 years, but he's America's mayor. He was when most of these state senators were being elected or grew up, some of these state senators were watching 9/11 and watching Giuliani being out there helping reorganize the city after that. He is a hero. Like a war hero. It's like having Patton or Bradley talking to Congress. He has an elder statesman-like ability that these guys are like a little awestruck that Giuliani is here saying these things. And there are some of these guys are like, why are you, Mr. Mayor, like, why are you telling us this stuff? What are you asking us to do here? And he's laying it on the line for them. He says, look, this is the fate of the republic. And I'm giving you a special chance in history to join me in doing something extraordinary to save the republic from these corrupt machines that you all hate, who have been screwing you over for years. And these people are starting to buy it. They're like, oh, wait, this is our like I said, this is our chance. Like Mastriano says in his speech, which I've watched like 20 times. He's like, this is our time. This is our hour. This is when we strike back. This is when we roll. He's a former Army colonel who did 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan. He's like, I can't believe that we have spent billions of dollars making sure there are election integrity in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we can't have a safe and secure election in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And we're going to fix this. And yeah, so I don't know if we're going to win, what's going to happen, but you have Rudy Giuliani, the guy who put all those mobsters away, who was mayor of New York, who fixed that city, and walking in, the hero from 9/11 walks into your state house and tells you that you need to do what's best to save the republic. Why wouldn't you do that? Especially when you have all these media types. You got to remember, these guys are us, right? They are the ones who've had to deal with being smeared, called all kinds of names by the fake news media and big tech and all that stuff. And this is their, much as and a lot of them voted for Trump, much as they pulled that lever for Trump to 2016 to send a big middle finger to these people, he's doing that again. These guys are looking at that chance to do that again. Who wants to be just a state's legislator who just approves another election? Why wouldn't you want to be one of the state legislators that is mentioned in the history books? Right? Like, this is their chance to. I remember one time reading an article by some outgoing congressman, and he was, when you first come to Congress, you say to yourself, you'll never be president, but secretly hope you do. And there's always a time when you realize you're never going to be president. And then you kind of fade out. And here's their chance to be in something big, be more important. And why do you go into government if it isn't to be involved in the process and be a historic figure and have political scientists and historians write books about you and what you did? Like, so we'll see. But I just wanted to take time. I thought about doing this as an essay on Ricochet, and I'm like, you know what? I'd rather just say it to someone and explain it to you. And that's what I did here. So that's, like I said, my special bonus feature and little video for locals is completed. Thanks for listening to me to rant. Good. See you later, guys. End meeting for